Hello and welcome to Everyday Eternal number 101, your favorite, most deceptively named bi-weekly legacy podcast. Today's show is brought to you by our brand new Patreons, Micha Heilo and Zachary Ryle. I'm sorry if I butchered both of your names, but I actually did practice, so it only took me like many years to correctly pronounce Callum's first name, man.
10 years at least, and still working on it.
Yeah, it's just like it's such an amazing name, but people struggle more with my last name. But yeah, that's pretty straightforward, I guess. In your case, you just came back home from work, right? You sneaked out of work to make it to our recording tonight.
Yep. Pubs have properly opened in England this week. We can go inside, and going to one of my favourite ones with some friends this evening. And I've just have a very busy week this week, and lots of beer to be drunk, lots of pubs to go to, lots of things to do. And I'm going to kick off this podcast with this sound. There we go.
Did you break something?
No, I opened a beer. If that counts as breaking, I broke the seal of a beer. How about that?
That's good. That's going to be good enough, man. I apparently also broke a lot of seals or mislabeled stuff because I sent out all of our podcast charts to people were due, and apparently all the European ones were delivered, and literally all the ones sent to America came back to me, and they were like, Julian, like, what are you doing? This is not correctly labeled. Even though I went to the post office. Invoices.
But if you just put an invoice saying this is a gift, no duty or taxes to pay, you should be fine. I'll help you.
But I crossed out the thing, or I labeled the thing that says it's a gift. Like, you can label it from the outside, but they sent it back to me and they were like, yeah, this actually costs like 55 euros to send to the US, and it's going to take 2 months. And I was like, no way, I'm going to send it as a letter. But if you send it as a letter, even though I used like one of those big bubble wrap whatever thingies, like those really big ones, they were like, no, you can't send items, quote unquote, as a letter. If you send items, you have to send them as a packet or something, and that's gonna be insanely expensive. So no, I'm gonna try to figure it out.
They know your tricks.
In the end, it might be cheaper to just fly there and deliver it personally.
Yeah, that sounds good. Get everyone together in one place, like maybe the 100K. That's quite a while away. Yeah,
that's coming in October, right? And for those who don't know, the 40K has been rescheduled to sometime next year, right? I think it was supposed to come up this summer.
Yes, it is next year now. I can't remember exactly when, like maybe March or April, I think. I'm not sure. Which I really respect that because, yeah, America is doing pretty well on the vaccine front and they're opening things up and stuff. But he seems like if there's any risk at all, he doesn't want to be putting anyone at risk, basically. And I know people can make their own decisions and stuff, but at the end of the day, organizing events for like hundreds of people is still a bit of a no-no. So I think it was a good decision to postpone. I mean,
Definitely,
people are still going to get to play Legacy eventually. It's just have to wait.
I heard from some people that it sucked because they already had booked their flight, but on the other hand, like, what are you supposed to do, right? Like, I see, like, for me, it would definitely suck if I'd spent that money and I couldn't get it back from the airline. On the other hand,
we're in a pandemic. Like, that kind of stuff happens. It's not on him, really, I think.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward to the 100K. I'm really excited. Like, I haven't booked a flight yet, but I really want to go there and have a great time.
Yeah. Well, what else have you been up to recently?
Not so much. I've actually been putting a lot of work on the website. I guess I've been saying that on almost every podcast for the last half year now.
Since episode 1, Julian's been working on the website.
No, I put in like a couple of all-nighters, and
nice. It'll pay off.
You know the thing when you always want to like make something a little bit better, add a little bit more of this, a little bit more of that, and then it's like 8 a.m. and you're like, oh, I'm supposed to work today and sleep. Like, how does that work?
No, I've got absolutely no idea what you mean. I'll do something and I'll be like, yeah, it's done, cool. Not always. I kind of understand. So yeah, that's been going on in my end. What have you been doing other than like being a patron at all the various pubs of London? Honestly, not the most exciting one this time. I just haven't been doing a lot recently. When was our last podcast? Probably a couple of weeks ago.
Like 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, I've got the Warhammer bug pretty hard again. I've just been playing loads of that because we can see friends again, and yeah, the game is kind of similar to Magic. It's as complex, and you can like build lists and stuff. So it's a kind of similar style. So I've got that bug back and been doing that, but otherwise not even that much. Like I'm just kind of head down, working, and just existing. That sounds so awesome, depressing. Man. It's not that bad.
What are your hobbies? Existing. Oh yeah, I will swipe you right on. Like, oh my god. You see the weirdest stuff on Tinder. Like, I don't know, man. It's sometimes. Oh yeah, and just like that, my phone goes off. Apparently, It's not about the upcoming banned restricted list. I hear you've actually got things open, because if there's anything to happen...
Yes. I'm on the page, cool. And it's saying you are not authorized to access this page, as it does for everyone else. Obviously, it says Splinter Twin is unbanned, because it always will be unbanned on every BNR. But I'll keep pressing F5, and if something comes up during the show, then we can report back.
Awesome. And speaking of reporting, we received a listener question from Mana Symbol, who's actually one of our new Patreons, Zachary. And he's asking about something I've been talking a lot about on not only podcasts, but also my stream and pretty much any place that gives me some kind of voice. And that is what I always say about I want to win the tournament. I'm not content doing like well in 5 tournaments. I want to do really, really fucking well in 1 tournament, and I don't care if the other 4s are like misses or whatever. And he's basically coming from the other side of things. And before I think we go into the meat of it, I'm just going to read out basically the core part of his question. That starts out with more of a statement about why he's playing and what he thinks about all the different approaches to playing Magic and why you would play it. Quoting: I rarely register something I consider to be top tier or even on competition for top tier at the time. Whenever I have, I felt like I've not really enjoyed it or felt like at a significant disadvantage. I think philosophically, I want to have a deck advantage of having some kind of unknown cards or angles of attack that can get me some points against top tier decks piloted by top tier players. I know that a quality of mine is enjoying my name appearing with reasonable competitive results with a deck that people don't properly understand. I think that's a very, very common mindset in Legacy. What do you think, Callum?
I completely agree. I was going to when you'd finished reading, I was going to preface it by saying this is a fantastic question. I think he's worded it very well, because I bet a lot of people listen to this right now going, yeah, that really resonates with me. I really get that. And it really resonates with me. I think this is some of the differences me and you have. I am that kind of player as well. I like to have something different. I like to see my name with something different as well. It kind of ties into the enjoyment out of making new decks and brewing and stuff, but not always. I think I would confidently say this is probably a very large majority of Legacy players. So first of all, Zach, you're not alone. This is a pretty common thing to have. Breaking it down, people just enjoy different things is the angle I'd come at it. A great example of someone not like this is Jarvis Yu. He says he likes some decks more than others, but he gets the most enjoyment out of winning. And he enjoys playing Magic in all different ways. At the end of the day, the most enjoyment he gets is from winning once the tournament's finished. So for him, playing something like Delver through all the different iterations over the years, that's going to be his kind of go-to. Obviously, he plays different decks as well. He's known for lands and stuff. But at the end of the day, he's going to be taking every advantage he can get to win. The hurdles he jumps over of playing the decks and the matches in between are just, as I said, hurdles. And at the end, he's going to be raising the trophy like he's done at GPs with lands and stuff. And I feel like that applies to you as well, Julian.
Well, so definitely not to the extent of Jarvis. Okay. I wasn't even thinking about him when we were thinking about this topic, but you probably picked one of the best players to pick for this, because he's the embodiment of the competitive spirit and wanting to give it all. And I think I remember we talked about this with him a year or two ago, and others as well. And we talked about why some of the quote unquote legacy grinders try to also make it in standard and the Pro Tour, and why others don't. Mm-hmm. And he talked about he wants to play at the highest level against the best possible competition. And I think that also really reflects on what you just said about that mindset.
Absolutely. And then you can take it further. I think this is going to be... I think it'll have a different effect on different players from formats as well. So further, I think a lot of Legacy players will resonate with this, because Legacy is the format where you can do pretty flashy different things, and it's not as kind of fast and oppressive as Vintage can be. Don't worry, Vintage fans, I know that it is an incredibly slow and grindy format as well and has a lot of gameplay, but Legacy is a casual format for the most part, especially now, sadly to some, not so sadly to others. Online at the moment, with the world still being the pandemic, it's been pushed to some of its higher levels of competitiveness, because people are playing the best decks they can. But at a local game store level, it is still people playing the decks they find fun. So this is exactly what you're saying you were like, Zach. I will never play Delver at my local game store. I'll maybe play Miracles if it's a really fun way of doing it. Like I've played Miracles with Thought Lash and Laboratory Maniac as a win condition and stuff. So and then you want to do well with a really offbeat deck, and I think that's very common. It's why you see people like championing decks. I'm going to pull another example of Reaple Cheap. Sorry, I've forgotten your actual name, but he's been championing the Curses Stompy deck for a very long time. And look, he says it's got a bad Delver matchup. That's a very bad place to be right now because he's playing lots online and there's loads of Delver online and he struggles with that. But it's a thing he likes and it's a thing he really enjoys playing, and it does have enough game to put up some solid results. And so he obviously enjoys the recognition of getting something that's offbeat and with his name on it. And there's probably plenty of other examples as well. And people do just also learn a kind of style of deck they like, and Legacy does reward you for knowing your deck. There is always this counter-argument of when you're just very good at the format. Like I would say Jarvis is incredibly good at Legacy and could probably play almost every deck very proficiently. He still knows, like for example, lands or Delver that he has a lot more experience with better than something that he has less experience with. And that's going to be true for everyone, just at differing levels. So if you put a lot of work into the one or two like kind of styles you like, you will definitely pick up points.
I also think that it's not only a matter of playing something offbeat, but if you pick a deck and you really make a name for yourself with the deck, that's also like pretty rewarding. For example, I think the best example that comes to mind is Rich Kelly, right? Rich Kelly is very much known for being one of the best Delver players in the world. And people would say, oh, Delver is certainly not offbeat. Like, oh yeah, I've seen that deck like plenty of times, more than any other deck in the world. But he's got away with the deck, and also like the way he writes and talks about the deck, that his name is very heavily associated with Delver, and you don't always need to go out of your way to play Delver. And also
very true.
To talk about stuff like local metas, which is usually like where you first start, I guess, making a name for yourself and enjoying it, right? That's a cool thing. I also certainly enjoyed it when I played at my LGS, which published like top 8 names and lists, and I started being there. That's one of the greatest feelings ever, like when you first start getting recognition. You're
known for Elves, and Elves is like currently tier 1, one of the best decks as well. But if someone says your name, they're like Elves. And so that's a very good point. So if you want to get a name for yourself, you don't have to play something super offbeat. You just need to, I guess, play a lot, get out there and stuff. The only thing I take I don't quite agree with in this first opening statement and question he had is he says I want to have a deck advantage of having some unknown cards or angles of attack that can get me some points against top tier decks piloted by top tier players. I feel like this is always overblown. I don't think you actually get as much of an advantage out of these kind of things against the top tier players. Against someone who doesn't play a lot of Legacy or like is playing at a kind of local game store level and is not like keeping up with the metagame and new things and stuff, yes, you will definitely get some advantages. And you'll probably get some advantage against the top tier players too. But when you have someone like yourself, Julian or Jarvis, or someone who's played Legacy for so many years and just knows how cards work together, they can use deduction to work things out. Like we had someone in our Legacy chat ask us a question, which this is a great example because I got completely wrong, and I think actually most of us got it wrong, but it shows deduction. So he said, if your opponent goes once upon a time, miss, and then... No, sorry, doesn't miss with it. Once upon a time, hits a Street Wraith, cycles the Street Wraith, and then doesn't play a land and passes. What kind of deck would you put them on? We guessed a bunch of things, but by deduction, we got to... It was probably like a brew with Hollow One and like a kind of madness.
The Hollow One thing was your thing. I thought that
it was my thing, yeah.
Quite out there.
But then, like some people said, it could be Manless Dredge, but they were on the play, so you can use all these kind of deductions. So my point isn't that I was wrong. It ended up being Bug Shadow, which is kind of a cool idea. I like the idea of Once Upon a Time in the deck. But what I mean is, we did get down to a couple of different decks, and you can like deduce quite a lot of things. So at the end of the day, by deduction, the good players will work out what kind of cards you have in your deck just by what they've seen, so the actual advantage you gain is not super high. So I wouldn't concentrate on that too much, but by all means do play the kind of different decks if you want to. Like they're really fun. You can do well as well. Like I mean, Esper Mentor is my most recent kind of deck I've enjoyed and stuff, and myself included didn't expect it to be very good when I started playing it, and it's okay now. It's not putting up great results, but it's a deck that's like, I would guess, tier 2 and can win events, like as I did. So yeah, do what you find fun, because if you're enjoying a deck as well, you have the motivation to make a proper sideboard guide, you have the motivation to play it more, and playing it more just makes you better with the deck as well. If you're playing a deck which is the best deck, but you don't really enjoy, your motivation is not there, your enjoyment of the game is not there, and that is a very real thing. Even for players that just want to win at all costs, if they're not enjoying very much and it becomes too much of a job or a chore, unless they're like working on a pro tour kind of style thing, then yeah, they'll just play less. So that's my feeling on that first kind of part of the question.
Yeah, let's actually segue into the more detailed questions that Mana Simple submitted. And those are, there's basically 4 questions, but I grouped the first 2 together because I think they're kind of the same or relate to each other. And the first one is, how do you feel about other players' philosophies? And the second one being, how do you think they might affect the performance of others? So I think you already summed it up pretty well, right? There's no right or wrong philosophy as long as you're getting enjoyment out of your hobby. If it was your job, then the wrong way to do it would be not to win enough money to make it your job. So, I mean, nobody's really doing that in Legacy, right?
Yeah.
But in the end, enjoyment and fun is what matters. And like you mentioned,
kind of, yeah. Just to be like slightly like different. Enjoyment is what matters for that person that knows that enjoyment matters. You do have to be very honest with yourself. Like, by not playing a top tier deck, you aren't giving yourself every single advantage to win. Sometimes you can come up with a deck which is actually just like a metagame killer and actually the best thing, or you discover like a really broken archetype or something. When you do that, amazing. That is just like the best high you can get when your deck is actually legit amazing and good. But you do have to balance like your expectations with like how far you can push your deck to be as good as possible, but still be in the boundaries of what you find fun and is going to like bring enjoyment to you. And so if that boundary is actually quite low and you really want to play super jank stuff, then you need to set your expectations of how much you're going to win quite low. But if your boundaries are, I want to just play like different cards in kind of blue-white X control decks, then your boundaries of winning can be pretty high. You're going to win a lot with these things, but you just want to play different win conditions. So adjusting how much you think you're going to win realistically is going to add to your enjoyment of it as well, I think.
I guess we could actually go back to like ancient Greece and Epicure and all those guys who talked about, hey, what really matters in life, and
yeah.
Like some of those actually answered well. Enjoyment and joy is like the biggest thing, and others were like, no, that's wrong. But
and then one came to the center of the pulpit and said, casting Notion Thief in response to a Jace brainstorm.
Oh God, get out of here!
And everyone just stands up and applauds and goes, "Yes, I agree. That is the best thing in life." And then case closed.
I already die inside when they do it in response to Fish Visionary. I can't even imagine how bad it happens in response to Brainstorm. Yeah. But yeah, going to especially the second part of that question, how do you think these different philosophies affect the performance of the other players? And I think one of the major reasons, and I guess that's one of those things that many people don't want to hear, that is the fact that people... I don't know how to phrase it. I guess I can just like straight up say it. People not trying to give their best on a competitive level is a major reason why certain players often rise to the top. And I think that more than ever shows at, for example, Legacy GPs. Because if you go into a Legacy GP, like what percentage of players is really trying their best they can? I think there's probably like less, let's say you have a Legacy GP 1,000 something players, you probably have fewer than like 50 players who are really trying to give it their best without any bias towards like certain decks and stuff. And maybe 50 is already too high.
I was going to say, I bet the number of players is actually a lot lower than we think, and you nailed it. I think it's actually quite close to that.
I wouldn't even count myself among those. Like you're talking to the guy who flew to the United States to play the biggest Legacy GP ever and registered like Heritage Druid in a meta where you could play Treasure Cruise.
Yeah, because they were playing Full Bolt and stuff as well, right?
It was not, not beautiful, but yeah.
Well, look, that was you didn't go into it like thinking I'm 100% trying my best. You went thinking I'm going for a trip to meet friends, and that is the lowering of your expectations to balance how much enjoyment you get out of it. So I'm sure you said the trip was amazing, even though you didn't win it.
It's one of the best trips ever, seriously. The thing is, like you mentioned, it's a trade-off, right? Barely anyone does that, pushing themselves as hard as they can. And going back to like the whole fun versus job thing, we don't really have the pressure to do that. I guess if I'm on Magic Online and I just sold a bunch of tickets and I'm like, I really need to like do well now because I want to like build up tickets again, then I play like Blue-Red Diver.
I'm the similar actually. Whenever I sell stuff and I have not much, I'm like, I need to play something good to win some back, and then I can go back to me playing like Woe Strider and all the stuff. With Voice Rider and Grave Pact is like a pretty sick combo, by the way.
Yeah, so basically, from my side, the answer to all of that is the very fact that the vast majority of players is in it with a significant part of their intention is to just have fun and like play what they enjoy is a major reason why a much smaller percentage of players does even more well than they would already, because they're playing like a really teched out deck, whether they like picked up the deck list from somebody who basically net decked but also understood the deck or even came up with it themselves. That's different things, but overall, yeah, this is how I think those different performances influence each other. And also, like what you mentioned, getting the deck advantage by playing something out of left field is like much, much less important than you would actually think. I think I've been on record on previous episodes where I say I usually want like, or not usually, but if I think it's worth it, I want like a couple of like cards, ideally at instant speed, that help me in certain matchups. But I don't want to switch to like an offbeat deck to give me that advantage. For example, when I play elves, I think crop rotation very often makes a really big difference, especially against like the really tight matchups against really good players, because it's instant and can be quite punishing if you basically get to like reset a wasteland on your cradle or something. But I agree that playing something offbeat to get a deck advantage is rarely ever really a thing. Just because of the nature of the format where Delver is so incredibly impressive. I was almost going to say oppressive. I don't think it's oppressive, but it's definitely meta defining and meta shaping. Like it shapes everything we do in the format.
There's some times you could like kind of swing it to a bit of an advantage. Like if you're playing a base blue-red deck and you go like turn 1, Island, Ponder, turn 2, Preordain, Volcanic Island, you're just like, is this Sneak and Show? It could be Ant, it could be Blue-Red Delver, it could be Rug Delver, it could be like Blue-Red Omnitel kind of style thing. There are some things there, so if you're playing like a Blue-Red based kind of deck, it could be fair or combo. At that point, and I think your point about instant speed effects actually is very good. I never thought of it like that. It's really, really smart. And if you're playing like instant speed things and pretty off meta, then people won't expect it and they won't play around it. Like I guess a nice example is the inclusion of Bone Crusher Giant in kind of blue-red based, even non-Delver decks recently. A lot of people probably weren't expecting that, and then all of a sudden you're facing that card. I don't know what kind of effect it has really, how you would play around it, but maybe that's a bit too rambly. But yeah, you do have something to gain if your crossover is with a lot of other decks. Like whenever, for example, if I'm playing a fair deck with like Source of Plowshares and Force of Will, and my opponent just goes like turn 1 Island Ponder, I will very rarely ponder on turn 1 because I don't know if I need a Force or a Source of Plowshares. So that's like a little advantage you get by being a bit unknown and looking like other decks. Yeah,
that's actually a really good one. That's somewhat based on tactics, right? Like how do you read what they're about to do? How do you beat that? Something I also think that's really important when considering like playing something offbeat is that even though you play something maybe different, maybe weird, that's ideally supposed to be good against Delver, from the Delver side, it's actually almost always the same when you play against these weird decks. You gotta somewhat estimate what they will be capable of doing at which point in the game, and then you gotta like line up your resources accordingly that you barely get there before they actually get to do something. That's basically always the same.
But so many times, like you, as you say, you play this deck that's meant to beat Delver and it's a bit offbeat, but they're just going to play their Delver turn 1. They're going to daze the removal spell or the spell they care about, and they'll wasteland a non-basic, and they'll Force a Will a spell when it's going to be groundbreaking and stuff. Like their game plan is proactive and fairly linear, just reacting to you and getting your life total to 0. So yeah, the way they play around different stuff is actually all fairly similar. Like Force of Will and to an extent Force of Negation covers so many things, Daze as well, that they often don't care what kind of nonsense you're up to. It's the same thing for them to counter a Force of Will, which is very counter a Show and Tell, which is very known, to countering a Grave Pact, like I said just now. It's the same shit to them.
So moving on, there's 2 more questions, but I think we already kind of answered the third one, which is, do you think that such differences in philosophy work well for those individuals, or that there's one best way to approach it? Well, I think we've basically said it like this 5 times now. It
totally up to you, the player. You choose how you work on it.
the best way to approach it is the way that makes you happy in the long run. Like avoiding frustration and being happy, dude. I really feel like one of those ancient Greeks now. And finally, the fourth question, I think that was more like a joke thing. At least that's what it looked like in our Discord. But I think that's actually the most interesting thing is, finally, can you just tell me to stop playing less than the best selection of decks in order to have the highest chance of success? Like, I'm not the one who can tell you that. Like, you are the one to make that decision if you want to. Because if you really wanted that, you would do it.
I actually have the best way to tell yourself that. Just do it. And the moment you like win an event with one of the best decks, like winning is really fun. This is going to sound so obvious, but the rush you get or the enjoyment of winning an event coming first is fantastic. So do it, play one of the best decks. If you're like, once you hit the top 8, you're like, yes, I'm doing it. I'm actually, doing well in an event. When you win an event with the best deck, you're going to be euphoric over winning the event. That's going to by far trump your feelings of, oh, I did it with a top deck. You're just going to be happy. So that is the best way you can tell yourself to stop playing bad decks and play a better one, is see how much you enjoy winning an event and go for it. So don't feel bad about playing a best deck, because winning is really fun. It's why we play this game and try to win as well. So it's that measure.
You know what all of these questions reminded me of? They reminded me of one of the best, I thought it was an article, but actually it's a chapter from a book. And it was one of the best things I ever read in my life with regards to anything competitive, like basically competitive gaming. And that is from the book Playing to Win, Becoming a Champion. I mean, that's quite the obnoxious title. By David Sirlin from 2000. So that book's already like quite old. And for those who don't know him, he's pretty well known for his writings on competitive gaming in general, but Street Fighter in particular. But all of what he says does not like only work for Street Fighter. It basically works for the competitive mindset. And I want to quote one of the most important parts from it, because everything we talked about, having fun, winning, whatever, is the most important thing is to be aware of your self-imposed handicaps. Basically, if I was to say, oh, I will only ever play tribal decks, that's a handicap I have, because tribal decks will not always be good. But if I'm aware of that, then that's going to minimize my frustration with tribal decks not being good. And if I wasn't aware of that, if I kept like hitting the wall and I was like, oh no, but I need my Treefork deck to do well, but it doesn't, everything sucks, blah, 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 then I would become a scrub. Like we often talk about, at least in Germany, we use that word like basically as a loan word from English, scrub, like this guy's a scrub. And I've never thought about what that actually means. To me, it just like meant a bad player. But actually the scrub is a mindset, the scrub is a mentality. And I think one of the most important things to not get frustrated in the long run by whichever approach you choose is to be aware not to become a scrub. And let me quote from the book. I hope this is not going to give us any copyright infringements. I mean, it's not, right? So, the scrub mentality is to be so shackled by self-imposed handicaps as to never have any hope of truly being good at a game. You can practice forever, but if you can't get over those common hang-ups, in a sense, you've lost before you even started. You've lost before you even picked which game to play. You aren't playing to win. A scrub would disagree with this, though. They'd say they are trying very hard. The problem is, they are only trying hard within a construct of fictitious rules that prevent them from ever truly competing. And I think that's... this guy is really good with words, not gonna lie. Like, he's really summing up how I feel about when people say, oh, I want to do it this way, I want to do it that way. It's like, yeah, you can, but this is not how the game works. Like, if you only ever want to play your Treefork deck, that's fine, but then don't come into it expecting to be like the best player in the universe, because you voluntarily chose those handicaps. And if that's okay for you, and if you're having fun by like doing that, that's okay. But don't ever fall into the trap of putting handicaps on you, but not being aware of those, because in the long run, that's gonna not only make you like super frustrated, but possibly even like super toxic to the people around you. And that's not who you want to become. And I think that's one of the biggest things to take away and to really take in whichever game you play.
Yeah, I agree. I found this, he speaks the truth. Like, it's very, very true. And I know that I've been in that situation at some point in the past. 6 or so years ago, I played loads of Nick Fit at my local game store. And I got to the point where I was like, I'm going 3-1 most weeks. I think this deck is actually quite good. But in hindsight, I was playing Nick Fit to 3-1s in my local game store. which it was incredibly fun. But I was that scrub. I can admit. And yeah, but then I started playing like better decks and stuff, and you do start to realize this thing. And I find the wording here quite harsh, but it's still the truth. So you could like soften it for yourself a bit. But yeah, I think you've written a note in the show notes, which I think is especially important. You've said the fun-loving Spike is aware of those, the scrub is not. The scrub is frustrated because of this, the fun-loving Spike is not. So once you like get to a point where you understand that you're playing a deck which is just like really silly and it's completely for fun, you really embrace it and you just enjoy playing this nonsense because you don't have these like delusions of grandeur that you're actually breaking the meta with your Nick Fit brew. And sorry, I really love Nick Fit, but it's just the easiest target. And the person that doesn't notice this is the player that always plateaus, and that was always my like fear of the plateauing player, where they think they've got to a point where they're so good that they don't see themselves improving. They're just like getting unlucky and not winning as much as they should do. That is the worst place you could be as a player. So you do need to level up enough to get to this point where you realize each level of things and how far you want to push winning and stuff.
It's also quite a liberating feeling once you start playing like the top tier decks. I will never forget like the 2 times I switched to like a top tier deck. Like the first one was in 2009 when I first started playing survival decks, which were like not the range-bound ones, but just like mid-range survival decks. And starting to play with those decks, I always felt like, oh, I'm not good enough for this kind of deck. But then again, once you start playing that and you watch other players who you think are good enough, you also realize, hey, they're actually like making stupid mistakes that I was not making. Like it really gives you a feeling of growth once you start playing super strong decks. And yeah. I think when Manasimo like wrote that he feels at a disadvantage when playing those. I mean, I guess part of the feeling could come from the fact that you're not getting this factor of playing the weird deck, and then you think you're getting advantage out of that. But I think in the grand scheme of things, we already talked about that, right? You are giving yourself a competitive advantage by playing those top tier decks for sure.
I think you would also be surprised by how often you do enjoy these competitive decks.
Yes.
For me, my things were, I guess, Miracles with Top and Shardless. I played a lot of both of those when they were very good, however long ago, and they were like my first proper good decks I played and stuff. And I think Esper Stoneblade, after it won GP Denver as well, I picked that up. That was my first like very good legacy deck, I think. Funny to think Esper Stoneblade, huh? and more recently, I what's it called? Underworld Breach is also another very good one that I played a bit recently, and Luris decks. But other than that, like, yeah, I didn't ever pick up like the best broken deck for quite a while for the years in between that. Like Grixis Delver was horrifically broken when it had Probe and Deathright Shaman, and for some reason was like, I feel like if Deathright Shaman and Probe were legal and like that old Grixis Delver deck was legal now during this like pandemic and stuff, it would be like 40-50% of the metagame in all the events. So yeah. But I think, like I said, as to the beginning of the sentence, like you'll be surprised by how much you enjoy them. My point of this was I loved Miracles and I loved Shardless, and Breach is one of my most favorite decks I've ever played in my life. I don't really enjoy playing Delver, so I don't play it very much only because I played it actually a lot. I'm a scrub. It is. I completely acknowledge that I am hindering myself by not playing Delver very much. I played it so much when I was like a bunch of years ago that I don't know. I also play it quite badly, I think, honestly. So that's your point, where other people play it badly as well. So maybe I just don't play it as badly as the medium players. But this is where I adjusted my thing. So at the moment, if I was playing to win, it probably should be with Delver or Elves, I think. And I enjoy Elves, so I would probably play Elves in a big tournament if it was coming out tomorrow. But if Elves wasn't an option for whatever reason, then I just don't know if I'd play Delver, and I completely acknowledge that I'd be hindering myself there. But I am the scrub in this situation. I am hindering myself, and it's on me, and it's up to me to adjust my expectations of the event.
That's the most important point, right? I was going to say, like, adjusting your expectations, that's the one that's going to avoid frustration, because that's the thing that really kills you in the long run.
Because at the end of it, if you do really well, you're satisfied with the result, of course, because you did well, and especially because you didn't succumb to playing something you didn't enjoy. If you do badly, well, look, it's on you. It's fine to blame yourself for these things, and it's fine to go into a thing thinking this is on me if it goes wrong, and it does, and that's fine. You accept it before it even happens to you. So it's not really a bad thing, I think.
Awesome, man. So I think here we kind of want to move on. There have been two cards lately in Legacy, especially this month, that have been everywhere, right? And if you've been playing Legacy lately, I think you already know which two cards we've been talking about. I guess the second one hasn't fully established itself yet, but it's about to. But those two cards are Expressive Iteration and Abundant Harvest. And why don't we start off with the Expressive Iteration? For those of you who don't know, I think we've talked about the card before, but quick rules text. It's a sorcery, a blue and a red. Look at the top three cards of your library, put one of them into your hand, put one of them on the bottom of your library, and exile one of them. You may play the exile card this turn. So basically, this is kind of like which card looks at the top three? Like an impulse for three,
kind of.
Yeah. But you get to basically keep two of them, one of them just for a turn.
Yeah. So this card has caused a lot of diversion. Like a lot of people think it's completely cracked and broken. A lot of people think it's like just too slow and clunky. I am being the really boring opinion of like it's somewhere in the middle. I'm sorry, but I think it's very good. I don't think it's like broken or insane. Like, I mean, it's like a 2-mana draw 2, which you do need to kind of work for and play on the right turns, which that is still really good for Legacy standards. Like I say this every single time we're like reviewing a blue card, but pitching to force, especially when it's a card that is slow and clunky in some matchups or some board states, is a huge plus for a deck like Delver. So,
actually, that's a really good point. I never thought about it this way because, sometimes when you play Delver, you know that you're not winning the long game, even if you have Expressive Iteration. You, not only like strategically, but from the point in the game right now where you are, even if I get a 2-for-1 here and there, this is not how I'm going to win. And then you're much happier to pitch like the grindy cards than to pitch, for example, a Delver or what's the flying thing, a Sprite Dragon.
Yeah. Well, this is just like the flexibility it gives you in terms of force things. Like you have the very aggressive draws and you have the very grindy draws, and because you're playing the cards for both, you do have the options available to you, and then you just pitch whichever one. It's kind of like basic gameplay, I guess, but I think it is a really nice positive to the card. Like, can you imagine if this card was red and colorless? It'd be significantly worse than the deck. I think it wouldn't even play it, actually.
Red and colorless. I think people would actually start playing that, maybe even like in Stumpy Shells or something. But that's not your point, right?
Yeah. So yeah, I think it's really good. People are still working out how many to play. I have a feeling it's 2 or 3. I've seen some really cool ideas. So Lewis CBR, I don't know if it was him completely first, but he started messing around with Mishra's Bauble in the deck. I think that's really cool because Bauble is already quite good with some other cards in the deck, so it's a counter for Sprite Dragon. It has some synergy with Delver, like you can look at the top card if you have a fetch and play before you reveal a card to Delver, so you can get some extra value from it like that. It's just good with fetch lands because you can see if it's a card you want. Delver is a deck where the delayed draw is quite punishing, but the trade-off seems worth it because it's a card. So if you have Baubles in your deck, you can maybe like turn 1 Ponder, leave a Bauble on top of the deck, and then Expressive Iteration. So you look at the top 3 cards, put one into your hand, one on the bottom, and the exile one that you can play is the Bauble. So you do draw 2 on turn 2 and stuff.
So you're saying you can basically like store the draw, but not having to pay for it yet. So you're going to have it on a future turn. Because
a lot of the problem that people had with the card originally was it's a draw 2 for 2, which is playable in Delver, but you can't play it on turn 2. Which is obviously a downside, but Bauble kind of fixes that, and it's always a card which is like kind of almost there. Maybe for like triggered young pyromancer as well, it'd be even better. But yeah, it's a cool experiment, and especially if you put it into Rug, so you have Tarmogoyf as well. Being an artifact is a pretty big deal, so you can very quickly get a Tarmogoyf to like a 4/5, 5/6 and stuff. So
interesting. Two things that I want to touch on is, you mentioned you think it's going to be like a 2-off or something. Recently, the trend went towards like playing as a 3-off, and then a lot of people started playing it as a 4-off, either in blue-red Delver or even Rock Delver. You already mentioned Lewis. He had a thread on Reddit, I think, a couple of weeks ago, where he talked about how it's not only good in blue-red, but also in Rock Delver, which is the second thing I want to talk about, because Rock Delver, unlike blue-red Delver, can make much better use of the extra mana, right? Because the green is giving it so much grind advantage, and of course, what's everybody's favorite Titan? Euro, that's the one. Mm-hmm. And I initially didn't think too highly of the card in Rock Delver, but with Rock Delver really becoming much more like a tap-out deck, like he also mentioned in the thread, I think Rock Delver has just like so much better value to get in the mid game and even the late game with Uro. Like I've been on the receiving end of Uro when I've played like other Delver decks, and I felt like, dude, I almost want to just like scoop when Uro comes into play.
Yeah,
for the second time.
You have to just like get lucky and wasteland them out in that sense. And when you're like trading these resources, like bolting and pyroblasting the Delvers and the Dragons and wastelanding each other, then Expressive Iteration becomes like a kind of a deal breaker when you're just getting 2 cards off it.
Yeah, I almost want to move as far as calling it like a treasure cruise. I know that's way too far.
Yeah, but I see what you mean. Like, card advantage in Delver is very powerful, as we've seen with like Dreadhorde. Of course, this is no Dreadhorde anywhere near, but like just one raw card in Delver is very powerful.
Yeah, and if you're playing like the Diver Mirror and one of the players has like 4 expressive iterations and the other one maybe got none, that's gonna make a pretty big deal, because once you become aware of that, you notice that you can just like play the passive game, and being able to play the passive game with Delver against another Delver deck, that's just like so relaxing that you know, okay, in the long run, I'm gonna get there unless you get your really broken draw. And I mean, between Delver and between Daze and Lightning Bolts, you have many ways to stop those broken draws.
Absolutely.
Something interesting that I also noticed, because I was on the receiving end of that, and one of the challenges lately was Underwater Bimbo. He, or they, I guess, played Blue-Red Delver with 4 copies of Expressive Iteration for like a couple of challenges now and did really well with them. I think got like a top 3 and won one of them and got a couple more top 32s. And the interesting part is no Wasteland. And I think that's actually quite smart. This, like, I never really liked Delver without Wasteland, but when you think about it, it's not that important to at least this kind of deck, because the way they are playing is they play 4 Monastery Swiftspear, which encourages even more of a tap out kind of gameplay, 3 Chain Lightnings, which is rather uncommon in the more like Wasteland focused Delver decks, 3 Preordain, which is usually also like 1 more than they usually play, 4 Explosive Iterations, which is 2 more than so basically what I'm trying to say is they play a ton of tap out stuff, and also like 2 fiery Fury Islets. That's basically like the Horizon Canopy for Blue-Red. So the way you play here is you just like put your stuff to the board and you see whether you get there, and then you have like these Dazes and Philosophers that you're going to use here and there, but it's not something that's as integral to the classic Delver game plan of Wasteland, Daze, you Delver, get there. You just like throw everything to the table and then you reload, and then you reload. And that reminds me so much of Treasure Cruise. And actually, correct me, I think the Treasure Cruise decks did still play Wasteland.
I think maybe it was 1 or 2.
Yeah, because, I mean, it feeds the Treasure Cruise, but it's not that important. It's usually like just better to cast another cantrip and have 1 more mana available to get to the Treasure Cruise. The funny thing is,
Wasteland is often really awkward in straight Blue-Red Delver, because it doesn't. The only threat it casts is Young Pyromancer. So this idea of like a tap-out Blue-Red Delver thing without Wasteland is not new. It's been around for it's been an idea for a while, and there's been different iterations. But Explosive Iteration is it's an incredible addition to the deck, and Sprite Dragon was also incredible in the deck. Like, Sprite Dragon is crazy good. So this deck, like, I remember playing years ago, like when Theme of the Ice came out, I was trying Blue-Red Delver but without Wastelands and the Swift Spears and stuff. And this deck looks like sleek. It's counterburn, but it's incredibly fast. The iteration adds some card advantage. You have all the disruption like usual, like Force of Wills and Dazes and stuff. It has 2 Brazen Borrowers for like some counterplay against, I guess, Dark Depths and stuff. Like, the Wasteland is going to hurt you in some matchups and stuff. But this deck looks ferociously powerful. Like, it must be so fast. I'm sure it kills in turn 3 sometimes, but often turn 4.
Yeah, it's very high up on my list of decks I want to try next. And it's interesting you mentioned that you are going to suffer from a disadvantage from not having Wasteland against certain decks. For example, like lands, right? When you really want to take out like a couple of lands that are annoying you. But if you look at the sideboard, there's actually 2 Price of Progress, which then again is going to give you a lot of game against those decks or 12 Post or anything that would rely very heavily on non-basic lands. So I think that's something they were actually aware of and are trying to fix here. Or maybe, they just had like 2 Price of Progress and they're like, let's play this.
I love Price of Progress. I hate Burn. I love Price of Progress. It is such a brutal card, and it's so good in Delver. Like, even though they have the 4 Volks and stuff, they have, 2 islands, 1 mountain? Yeah. I mean, this is the kind of card, especially from the sideboard, it's not been played in Delver for quite a while. This is the kind of card that's just going to absolutely get people and win you games you have no business winning. like lands really struggles to play around it. Lands used to have to land. The only way lands ever beat it in the past is with the Glacial Chasm. I think they don't even play that anymore, so they need to like quickly combo or something. I could see this deck actually playing like a couple of sideboard wastelands if something like Dark Depths got more popular and stuff, or you could just play more Brazen Borrows, I suppose. But anyway, yeah, I love the deck. It's great.
Yeah, I mean, you can even. I did that recently. I even posted about it on Twitter. I think I raised Dark Depth thingy on turn 3 with just like a giant Sprite Dragon that attacked twice and got there, and I jump blocked in between. That was hilarious. I loved it.
Okay, you need to make a 21/21 or above Sprite Dragon to just block, so it doesn't even die.
Dude, I've sometimes thought about that. When I had like a 12/12 Sprite Dragon, like a couple of cantrips, you think like, maybe, but yeah, that's something that never really happens.
Dream bigger. Oh, they just died too fast.
That's true. So, in speaking of Wasteland not being the most popular card in the format anymore, but still like one of the core elements of Legacy, there's another card that has started to see a lot more play lately. And that, I guess, is part of why I'm not too fond of Wasteland right now, and that is Abundant Harvest. It's a sorcery, 1 green, choose land or non-land, and then you reveal cards from the top of your library until you either reveal a land or a non-land, and the rest goes to the bottom of your library. I initially thought the cards go to the graveyard, which would have made this card absolutely insane.
Yes. Yeah.
But unfortunately, I guess fortunately it doesn't.
It's a 1-mana Balustrade Spy. Julian, please.
Oh my god, you're right. Yeah, I shouldn't be working for Wizards, man. So anyway, yeah, I think a lot of people actually missed this card initially because it was one of those mystical archives or something, which is, I still don't get it. It's not part of the set, right? It's not like a standard card, but it's still like in boosters. Is that how it works?
This card's going to be in Modern Horizons 2 as like a non-promo. And they just kind of released it early because they were doing this Mystical Archives, which is a collection of cards. It's more an excuse to put these cards onto Magic Arena, I believe. And so, yeah, it's on Arena, and they just kind of gave us a preview ahead of time, which I don't think they've done before, but it's quite cool.
So how do you actually get it in Magic Online right now?
In chests, I think.
Oh, just in chests? Okay.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, cool. No, sorry. So, it's in Strixhaven as well. So you get one of these kind of cards in every single booster in Strixhaven.
Oh, I got it.
Yeah, so you have some I've played against Lightning Bolt and Source of Plowshares in drafts multiple times now. It's kind of cool actually. Yeah.
Oh, dude, I remember when like the original Zendika came out, and Wizards used to have like all those super powerful
Power 9
first printing. Right? Yeah, Power 9 even. Like people would open a Zendika booster and they had Black Lotus in it.
So
but yeah,
cool.
that was like 11 years ago or something. These days we get Abundant Harvest, and actually the card is quite good, right?
I really like it. Yeah.
These kinds of effects never really saw play in Legacy in the past. At least I can't really remember one that used to be good. But Anorak has been pushing this card. Like, especially he has been pushing this card very heavily on his Twitter. And I'm kind of starting to see it. I
was really skeptical. I was like, it seems good. The card is powerful. It's a really powerful effect. But I and like everyone else was like, yeah, but how is this better than playing Preordain? And then when he kind of said, Callum, and everyone else, you're looking at the wrong way around. This is not a Preordain. This is a land. And then I was like, what do you mean? It's like, you don't pitch lands to Forcible. This was the argument, like, Preordain being blue, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, I see what you mean. So, yes, you do have to, like, play it as a land very often. But being a land that automatically becomes a non-land in the late game is incredibly powerful. And so he really sold me there when I thought about it a bit longer.
Yeah, that's basically the key to understanding the card, right? You're not playing it over Preordain, you're playing it over a land. And at least to me, the way I can make sense of that is if I consider it comes into play tapped land, right? Because you are paying 1 to get this extra land in case you don't have it. So what would initially be an untapped land, for example. Okay, let's give a very basic example. It's your first turn, you have a forest. It's your second turn, you don't have an extra land. You draw Abundant Harvest. So you cast Abundant Harvest, you name land, you get a land, you put into play. Now you have 2 lands, but only one of them is untapped. Whereas if Abundant Harvest was a land, then you just play it and you have 2 untapped lands on the second turn. So this is basically the trade-off if you play it as a land, on top of also occupying like one of your initial mana source slots.
Yeah, it's the Xerox theory, right? So you're playing Ponders and Preordains and sometimes Brainstorm to an extent over lands. This is why we've seen the number of lands played in Legacy decks, in Fair Blue Legacy decks especially, just go down and down. But yeah, this is just a new way of thinking about it. Like, I will completely hands up admit that I was comparing it to cantrips at first, but yeah, we need to like go back to the roots of what Xerox theory is about, which is replacing lands with filtering and velocity, really.
Yeah, the interesting thing is how low can we actually go on our initial mana sources, I think. Because if we look at the history of legacy deck building, the consensus has always been we need 14 initial mana sources. That has been like the case in Elves for a long time, until we went to 13 with the London Mulligan. In basically all the Delver decks for almost 15 years, it has been 14. It has been 14 everywhere. Control and midrange decks usually play a little bit more, but basically with this card and this new way of thinking about it, we are pushing the boundaries. And I wonder, you have more experience playing decks like this than I do, but can you like go down to 14 initial mana sources?
Maybe. I believe Anoreg's like core thing now is 19 with 3 Abundant Harvest. This is what he's playing in the decks. But keep in mind, this is decks playing Uro. So Uro is a card that wants you to have lands and is a super late game card. So when you're playing 19 lands in like a control deck with a very, very strong late game, and your win condition costs 3, then 4 mana, and is quite color intensive, that's saying a lot. It feels low to me. Until this card like came out and Anoreg started pushing it and other people started doing well with it, I've been actually myself just kind of doing a bit of a curveball on this style of thinking, where people like saying, how many lands can I cut to play more cantrips? I've been going the opposite. As cards get more powerful, I don't want to be spending the early turns cantripping for lands. I want to hit them naturally every single time. So Esperimental has 20 lands, and I could just play 1 or 2 preordains over 2 of the lands, but I think the cost of not naturally hitting your first few land drops is higher the more powerful the format gets.
This is super interesting. We just talked about Zendika. Have you played Zendika Draft with landfall and stuff?
Yes, yeah. You played like 20 or more lands.
Yeah, well, I guess not 20 in draft or something.
But 20 is very high for draft, yeah.
Yeah, 20 is insanely high for
yeah.
draft. But I remember back then that the theory was that most people said, in question, rather play more lands, even though like the format was super aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
And
one of the most aggressive
missing out on a land drop was that was a really big problem. And on top of that, you got a little bit of a reward from landfall as well. So while you think usually when like formats are aggressive, you can sometimes like cut a land, because aggressive usually also means like everything is cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
But in this case, it went the same direction you just described. People were playing more lands because missing out on a land drop was such a big deal. And you really wanted to hit your land drops early on. Yeah. So, yeah, that reminded me of that.
So, yeah, I guess this might coil back to... I stand by that idea. I think it's a little bit against the grain, and I'm not 100% sure on it. But at the moment, it depends on what kind of control deck. I think when you have cards like Uro, they do catch you up pretty fast. So you can afford to take a bit more of a risk. The Abundant Harvest is like, it really cuts down on the amount of risk you're taking, because you're guaranteeing yourself a land, which is a big advantage to it. Like, I've seen some kind of meme posts on Twitter and stuff about like someone, I think it was Anoreg as well actually, he played Abundant Harvest and he named land and went past like 10 non-lands before hitting a land, and he's just like, yeah, tell me how preordain's better. And I think Jeff Pokimoki also put a thing by like saying, I'm going to run the numbers for you, and it's like,
I saw that one. That
and
was
like
hilarious.
Preordain to hit a land was whatever percentage, which is a high percentage, and Abundant Harvest is just 100%. So it is really good. And I also like that it opens up some things for like it is like a cantrip, and it's not blue. I wonder if like we get more of these things and you can play non-blue like cantrip Xerox style based decks.
Yeah, the interesting thing is, I guess if we did that in non-blue decks, the first thing that comes to mind is Once Upon a Time, that you would probably play over this. Just because like non-blue but green's usually like pretty creature heavy. There's I almost can't imagine any other decks. I guess there's
yeah.
Sure. I'm blanking. I'm trying to make like green post like a green deck, but that's
yeah. So to get the effect as well, you need a lot of redundancy in the actual cards in your deck, I guess. Like post, for example, has a lot of setup cards, then a few payoffs. So you're not actually reliably getting a lot out of the naming non-land, because you can name non-land and hit like a crop rotation or an expedition map. But would you think you'd ever play this in Elves, or is the space is probably too tight?
No, I'm never going to play this. Like you mentioned, Elves needs like, if you play
have a low
like
land
this,
counter ready as well.
Yeah, and you need like very specific stuff. Like if I do this and I hit like Quarian Ranger, and it's like, yeah okay, cool, whatever.
But this is the kind of card I would just instant play 4 of in Jund midrange if the deck was okay. Or
That's
like,
a big if.
I know, but it's an example, right? Like if there was a green based thing, I think it gets better in fair decks where you, as I said, you have this redundancy in cards. So if your deck is made up of threats and answers, pretty simply, then you can play this kind of thing because yes, you want one over the other in certain different spots, but like cantrips are doing a similar thing already. When you ponder, you're looking for either a threat or an answer, or sometimes stuff. But when you have too many like cogs coming together to create a sum of its parts, this kind of card gets a bit worse because this is also another cog, and you can cast it to find another cog. When in reality, you just want the end cog.
It's interesting. It's interesting when you describe it like that because in that way, it's actually much more similar to Ponder, where you often like try to find something more specific as opposed to Preordain, which is just supposed to give you like better average draws.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think it is close to Preordain. Yeah.
Something I was thinking about actually with like this trend of like playing this as at least the way I think about it comes into play tapped land, is how far can these like mid-range and control decks actually push themselves to having these kinds of effects? Because like we mentioned, there is a trade-off, right? That you have to cast this. You don't get to play your land and play a 2-mana spell on turn 2. And
I think Wasteland also keeps it very honest. Like you can't go too low.
That's true. But also like these decks, at least the way I see them built, is they heavily rely on basic lands. Like whenever I play against them, they play like 2 or 3 duels maximum in the entire list, and the rest is all basic lands.
Yeah, so I guess you mean like the Bant kind of Uro things, yeah.
Pretty much, yeah. I've seen it sometimes with like red or black, like 4-color versions of it, but Bant is usually always the core. And I see them doing decently well against Delver, at least like the traditional Delver list with Wastelands and stuff. And I think that's what's going on here. Whenever you play like control against the Delver deck, is always you soak up the damage from the Delver and whatever they have, and eventually you have enough removal spells and you overcome them. Now we have 2 more things going on in Legacy right now. There's Explosive Iteration we talked about, which is going to give you a little bit more staying power in those Delver decks. And the second one being that Dreaded Arcanist isn't a thing anymore. So previously, we talked about how these decks had trouble playing the traditional game plan against Delver, where you soak up damage and then eventually you push back and you get there, because Dreaded Arcanist created card advantage, and card advantage can't be undone by Swords to Plowshares. I guess that's the core element of it. And now we've gone back to like more of a trade-off between life totals and board position as opposed to card advantage. And that's why they make this kind of stuff work more. But what I think about at this point is, how do you punish that? How do you push back against that? And the way you push back against it is to establish something in the first 2 turns that is not damage-based, but something that's structurally oppressive, I like to say. And that's like such a big word, I guess. But for example, in Elf's case, I always say when I play against control decks, once the second turn for both players has passed, I want to be ahead in the game, which usually means ahead on the board in some way, but that doesn't mean 7 elves in play, because then you get Terminus and then it's over. I want to be in a position where I untap and I cast Glimpse of Nature, for example, and they're like, fuck. You know, they're like, I want to counter this, but I know if I do this, then they're going to replay Elfish Visionary twice and it's going to suck too. Like,
I know that feeling very well.
Yeah, you've been on both sides of that.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that you want to do in order to push back against this kind of deck, if you want to do that in the first place, right? I'm just like exploring this scenario where this deck becomes like dominant and you want to do something about it. And that is doing something in the first 2 turns that makes them go, eh.
To play off that point, and actually to tie your point in with something I just said just now about raising land counts, the more powerful the format gets. I used to always side out a land against elves because they don't threaten your mana at all. Like you can, and very often you can like side out a basic if you have like 2 of the same one that's not necessary to play your removal and stuff. But I've stopped doing that recently because with the introduction of Shepherd and stuff, and just as the deck gets more powerful and stuff, more additions, I felt like as the power level goes up, I just can't afford to ever miss a land drop. I need to be playing removal spells or discard spells on turn 1 and 2. I need to be interacting. I can't be just cantripping. I can't be like turn 2. I can't be playing. You can kind of, but you're really punished for just pondering for a Source of Plowshares and casting on turn 2. You really want to be like Thought Seizing and Source of Plowshares or something. You need to be interacting at every level in the first few turns. And so to do that, you can't be pondering for a land because you're using a mana on these pivotal first few turns, like you say, where you want to be putting your opponent under pressure. And if you're already cantripping to find things just to play the game, you're under even more pressure.
That's actually interesting that you mentioned that, because I certainly noticed that too, right? Whenever I play against these kinds of decks and I notice them missing a land drop on a second or third turn, I guess everybody's happy when the opponent misses the second land drop. But against these kinds of decks especially, because this is the board position I want to get to. I want to have something that really makes them super uncomfortable, especially if they then have to tap out for, their Abundant Harvest. Or one of the best things that can happen to you is when they tap out on the third turn for Uro and don't put a land into play, because then you feel like, oh my god, I have absolutely free reign, especially if I have an Allosaurus Shepherd in my hand. And I think this is something you can really, really push them back on if you do that. Like, for example, I have just described many different ways. Chalice is one of those ways, even though it's better than it used to be, but it's like certainly not a great card right now. But also stuff like, Goblins, which is, I guess, weird. But if you get a Goblin Lackey and while they have to Abundant Harvest on their first turn, like, dude, you are going to put a second Goblin Lackey into play. I know I've been there, but but you get the idea, right? It doesn't necessarily need to be goblins, but something that pays you off in a way that is not damage in the first couple of turns, because those decks are pretty good at negating damage in the long run.
Definitely.
And I guess Uro is part of that.
Yeah, it is a funny feeling, because Uro is like such a powerful card, obviously. But when I'm playing a lot of decks and they just Uro on turn 3, I'm generally like pretty happy. I'm like, well, yeah, there's an Uro in my sights. I need to deal with it when I get to that point. But it could be so many other things. It could be an Oko. Wait, no.
Let's not talk about that guy. Actually, Oko is Oko actually getting a creature? I thought Oko was getting a creature in the next set.
There's a Marrow spoiler that says there's a legend which like has a ban card or something. I can't quite remember exactly, but I saw Justin Ganari like say it boils down to Oko, Ren, and 6, or just Ren, and Turak, which would be my guess. I think
I'm excited.
Yeah,
I want to see what's going to be.
Turak could be pretty sweet. Someone like jokingly said it's going to be like blue and a black for a 2/2 flying. The ETB is your opponent discards 2 at random. How broken would that be? Don't worry, it's a joke. It's not real.
Yeah,
because then you have a hymn you can Caracas back to your hand.
Yeah, let's do that. Can you cast it at instant speed? That would be
Of course, yeah. only you can only cast it in your main phase or your opponent's draw step.
It's actually going to help you out. It's
going to tell you, telling you how to play.
Supposed to play this card.
Yeah.
It's what we call child protection in German. It's like you can't accidentally do it wrong.
Yeah.
Awesome.
You don't do it in the upkeep when they have one card in hand by mistake, because Magic Online stops are weird.
Oh, don't get me started on Magic Online. So many restarted games on Magic Online these days. They're having some issues with Seven Library, Doomsday, and it's eventually going to be fixed, I guess. It just takes like a couple of high-end events where this happens, and Wizards going to be like, maybe we should look into it.
Maybe.
But anyway, you are off to the pub now, right?
Yes, I have to. Sorry. So our show lengths are always like we set to do about an hour, and they're always 2 to 2.5 hours. But this time...
Well, we've never done 2.5 hours, dude.
No, I'm sure we've done...
I don't do that much editing.
We've done some mega ones. But okay, fine. But this time I'm going to finish my beer that I'm having here to go to the pub and have some more.
Sorry, this is how you do it?
Yeah.
I like it. That's flavorful. Awesome. So if you want to support our habit of going to the pub, actually, I haven't been to a pub in like a year. The last time I went to a pub was the Irish pub in Prague. Oh my God, that was amazing. I want to do that again. I love
Prague. Oh my God.
Dude, yeah, I can't wait for the next Legacy GB.
God, yeah.
So if you want to support what we're doing, especially the podcast, you can do that, for example, on Apple Podcasts, leaving a review there. By the way, also the reviews are going to be published on our website. That is going to come out, I promise, at some point. And also by supporting us on Patreon. If you go to patreon.com/everydayeternal, you can join our cooking, eating, drinking, sometimes legacy playing community on Discord. Have a good time there. Submit your questions or just hang out with us. So, and by the way, also like support the running of maybe your favorite podcast, maybe not your favorite podcast, or us. It's up to you. So yeah, but in the end, the most important thing is just like let your friends know about the podcast, let your enemies know about the podcast if you really like them. Maybe if you want to like reconcile with them, that's the way to do it. But this is us, yeah. If you want to follow us on social media, by the way, @EternalMTG on Twitter, and there's actually gonna be an Instagram soon. I guess I should, but like before I release the episode, I should actually secure the name before anybody else like gets it and we're like, hey, this is like $5,000 for the Instagram account. Is that still a thing? People used to do that with domains.
I I think I have an Instagram account which I tried to like set up to look at Warhammers, and then it's like linked to my email address. So I had friends from like my music life, and friends from Magic, and friends from Warhammer, and friends from here and there, like all following. I'm like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know how to work this thing. So I'm a bit of a boomer when it comes to social media. I have a Twitter, which I never remember the name of, and I have a Twitch, which I never remember the name of, and that's...
This is the best way. It's like, guys, if you want to find me, just hit up Julian. He's going to get you
exactly.
the right contact things.
I'll remember one day.
If you want to find me at itsjulian23 on Twitter and It's Julian on Twitch. Website is going to be everyday-eternal.com. Is that how they say it? Or is it everyday, like, -eternal.com? Neither of those sounds good.
And to find me, you can hit up Julian, just DM him on Twitter or whatever, and he'll tell you the address.
Or whatever. So thank you, everyone. Also, thank you to our Patreons who are making this work, especially our higher tier Patreons on Eternal Witness tier, Tommy Hinks, Trent Browers, Testacular, Sebastian Holager, Guillaume, Jake, and Severin Schwarzhuber, and our top tier Grizzlebrand supporters, Victor Bernatzt, Batchubat, Scott Monroe, Jeremy Gates, Henry Kokutz, Tom Hepp, Christopher Reinhardt, and Paragon Games from St. Louis. A lot of you have actually sent me pictures, or at least posted in the Discord, pictures of you wearing the Everyday Eternal shirt, looking really, really slick, and can't wait to send out more as soon as I figure out how to get stuff into the United States. Have a good time, everyone. See you again by the end of the month, I guess, and let us know how your Delver adventures are going. Are you playing Wasteland, or are you just going straight to the face? Bye-bye.
Ciao.